Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Ayin Vov in Sandhedrin Zilun for Chenical basis Rav Shapiro. Yesterday we compared a man's own children, let's say children and grandchildren, to his wife's children and grandchildren, meaning his stepchildren. And we compared the pasuk, compared them because of the Gzerah of Hena. And then the Gemara said, well, maybe yes. At the last part of yesterday's daf said, well, just like if that's the case that his wife's mother-in-law and mother-in-law's mother is usher, maybe his as well. Maybe his who aim imo asura. Maybe his grandmother is also, just like his wife's grandmother is usher to him. Maybe his own grandmother's usher. And we know that's only a shni. It's only an isur drabana, not an isur raisa. So the Gemara disproved that. Now we have another question. Let's go. If we're comparing his to hers, let's compare hers to his. The end of the fifth line number 5 on Ayin Vav Amral. Imahu kalasa asura. Now, a man cannot marry his daughter-in-law. Even if his son divorced or died, he cannot marry his daughter-in-law in punishment of skila. So maybe just like his daughter-in-law's asur, af he kalasa asura. Maybe he can't marry her daughter-in-law. What would be her daughter-in-law? That would mean his stepson's wife. His stepson's wife. If it's his own son, right, then it's be a daughter-in-law. But his wife's daughter-in-law is his stepson's wife, and he could marry her. Let's say his stepson died, he can marry her. He's not related. But maybe we should say it's also just like his own daughter-in-law is also. Again, on his side, we're comparing his relations, his progeny to hers, and hers to his. Mahu kalas, just like he can't marry his own daughter-in-law if his son is no longer in the picture. Afi kalasas or Amrabaya, Amakra. So again, the same like we had yesterday. How do we know that the grandmother can't? So Abaya said because imchahi, only your mother, not your mother's mother. That's why your grandmother's not osir to you minat Torah. The same way Abaya says Amakra, Eishes bin chahi, the wife of your son, mishum eishes bincha tamachayvo mishum eishes bino. You're only chayiv if you marry your own son's wife, not if you marry your wife's son's wife. Meaning, if your stepson's wife is not also to marry her, if she's no longer married to your stepson. Rav Amar. So again, Abaye bases on a pasuk, just like imchahi eishes bincha eishes binchahi. Rav says no. Whether you learn out. When you learn Gzerah Shav, you learn out everything from the Gzerah Shav, A from B entirely, or whether you learn out partially, because you say the basic Isra is there, but then you go into the details based on its own. As you learn out A from B, the main idea, but some of the details go from A itself. Loasi, you can't learn out why. Okay, what do we want to say? Just like your daughter-in-law is asur, so is your wife's daughter-in-law. Mahu kalaso asura afhi nami kalaso asura umina. Okay, so just learn, if you're learning it out from your daughter-in-law, what's the punishment? Skila. Maina mahu beskila, afhi nami beskila. Okay, so lamanda beskila chamur. If you say skila is more chamur, you can ask, ma lahu shekain ima beskila. Okay, his mother is beskila. If you sleep with your own mother, that's skila. So maybe your daughter-in-law is also beskila. Tomer bihi. But with your wife, where you sleep with your wife's mother, the punishment is only sreifa. So why should the punishment be? So why should the daughter-in-law be skila? That's more chomer. Ba'od bita b'sreifa klasa b'skila. And others, one is that it's different. Tomer b'hishem masif. One is based on the basic comparison. In the case of the man, both his mother and his daughter-in-law b'skila. But over here, by the wife's daughter-in-law versus her mother, the mother's besreifa. So maybe why should the daughter-in-law be beskila? But does it make sense? If skila is more chamer, is the daughter, if you marry her daughter, if you marry your wife's daughter, that's sreifa. The kalasa beskila, and the kala is less of a relationship, right? Your wife's daughter is like what we call a first-degree relative. She gets sreifa, and then the daughter-in-law, who's not really related, not really a blood relation, should get a more stringent punishment skila. So Gemara says that's not a kasha. That's not a kasha. Why? Because look at himself. The bita b'sreifa, the man himself, his daughter's b'sreifa, b'kalasa b'skila. So that's not a kasha. But you can ask this kasha. Elamahu, just like you lo chalak the bein imo lekalaso. Oh, this is your kasha. You wouldn't allow daughter-in-law, your wife's daughter-in-law from your daughter-in-law. In your case, there's no difference between your mother and your daughter-in-law, both beskila. Afhi lo tachluk ba bein ima lekalasa. So therefore, you can't learn out. You should not make a difference between her mother and her daughter-in-law. And the mother, clearly the pasuk says is sreifa. So how could the daughter-in-law be beskila? Ulamandam or sreifa chamur. If you learn sreifa's chamur, mehai kushalon. So learn out from this last one. Just like him. By the man's own relationship, his mother and his daughter-in-law have the same punishment. So why should his wife's daughter-in-law versus her mother not have the same punishment? And here they're not, because if you're saying that you learn out everything that from the husband, learn out the wife from the husband. So just like the husband, the daughter-in-law is beskila, should also be beskila, and the mother-in-law of the wife is the mother of the wife, meaning his mother-in-law is besreifa. So you can't learn it. Even if you learn the other way, that you learn out, yes, let's learn out one from the other, but then put it in its place. So we'll learn out, what does that mean? Mahu kalas asur, just like his own daughter-in-law is asur to him. Afi kalas asur, so you can't marry also your wife's daughter-in-law. Okay, vulki basra, but not exactly the same. It's asur, but what's the punishment? Well, guess what? Put it in its place. Hasan with a beskila, by the husband, by the man, his own daughter-in-law and his mother a beskila. But over here, let's say, okay, so the punishment usually for their wife's relationships, as we've seen, the mother, the daughter is besreifa. So here also, the daughter-in-law should be besreifa. Just like you find by her mother. The Lamandam or skila chamur. If you learn skila is more stringent, how could you learn out her daughter-in-law from his daughter-in-law? His daughter-in-law is different because it's more stringent, because she gets skila, right? Because imo beskila, malhu, his mother's beskila, and skila is more chamer. So whereas by the wife, her mother's only besreifa. So you see, the wife is not as stringent. So therefore, maybe the husband's daughter-in-law would be also, but not the wife's daughter-in-law. Tomer behi shema besreifa. Her mother's only gets sreifa, so she's less stringent, and therefore maybe by him you say his own daughter-in-law is asur. But by her daughter-in-law would not be asur. V'od mahu chalakta. Listen to this. By him, chalakta bo bein bito lekalaso. By the husband, by a man, there's a difference between his daughter and his daughter-in-law. His daughter, as we've seen, gets sreifa. His daughter-in-law gets skila. Afi, so she also should make a difference to say tachluk ba bein bito. In other words, just like him, there's a difference between daughter and daughter-in-law. You should also say by her, there's a difference between daughter and daughter-in-law. So what do you want to say that the daughter-in-law, but here the bita and the kalasi are both besreifa. Her daughter is besreifa. If he sleeps with her daughter, it's besreifa. And you want to say the kala, the daughter-in-law should also be besreifa. Yeah, but that's not the same as if you're learning it out from the husband. The husband, there's a difference. Whereas the daughter-in-law is skila, daughter is sreifa. Even if you say that sreifa is more chamer, this last kasha is the same kasha. Even if sreifa is more chamer, how can you learn out her daughter-in-law from his daughter-in-law? By his daughter-in-law, there's a difference between his daughter and his daughter-in-law. Daughter is besreifa, daughter-in-law is beskila. But over here, you're saying by the daughter, by his wife's daughter and daughter-in-law, they would both be besreifa. So therefore, you can't learn out daughter-in-law. So therefore, at the end of the day, both these last two kashas, the one we ended with yesterday and one today, there we wanted to say that his grandmother should be asur to him, just like her grandmother is asur. No, you can't learn that out. So Minatorah, a man could marry his own grandmother, right? Technically, I don't know if kedusha would be chal, but at least, but it wouldn't be asur Minatorah. It wouldn't be a punishment Minatorah. And the same way, a man can marry his wife's daughter-in-law if she's no longer married. He can marry his wife's daughter-in-law, but he can't marry his own daughter-in-law. Bita man asas minai. Now we go back. Now we're no longer comparing his relations to his wife's relations. How do you know that a man's own daughter is forbidden to him? How do you know his own daughter? Now, if you look in the pasuk, if you have the chumashim, yesterday we saw the pasuk says, "Eres bas bincho bas bitcha lo skale." Don't marry, don't sleep with your granddaughter from your son. Don't meet with your granddaughter from your husband. We said from your daughter. And we said that this pasuk is not speaking about in marriage, because that's erbas isho bita lo skale, your own wife's children and grandchildren. Says if you're married to your wife, don't marry her daughter, don't live with her daughter, don't sleep with her daughter, and not with her granddaughters. There it says specifically daughters and granddaughters when it comes to marriage. When it comes to out of wedlock, it says your granddaughter or your granddaughters you cannot sleep with, Doesn't say out of wedlock. Even if they are your granddaughters out of wedlock. They're not your wife's daughters. You're married. You had a child out of wedlock with somebody, and your granddaughters are usher. What about your own daughter? It doesn't say that beferish. If you're punished for your granddaughter, certainly for your daughter. Avram would ask, right? How can you learn a punishment? Right? What's the punishment for this going to be? Sreifa, as we've said, right? Can you give an onish based on the Kal V'chomer? The answer is Gilui Milsa B'Almahi. Very good. Rashi explains beautifully that here's the Gilui Milsa, because why are your granddaughters usher to you? Because they're the daughters of your daughter. In other words, it's the same line over here. Your granddaughters are usher to you because they came from your own daughter. So obviously, your daughter would be usher too. That's not a basic Kal V'chomer. It's simply a revelation. And Rashi points it out to what would be El Shemenadin. He says the example. Let's say you sleep with your sister, who is your mother's daughter. Or what does the pasuk say? Right? You shouldn't go ervas achoscha basavicha o basimecha. Either your father's daughter or your mother's daughter. Okay, the punishment is chorus there, right? What happens if she's your father's daughter and your mother's daughter? She's your full sister, right? What about there? It doesn't say that. Oh, that's a Kal V'chomer. Ain't on Shemin. So we need a different drasha for that. That's on Shemin. Why? Because there the ervas your mother's daughter and your father's daughter are not learned from one another. One's not an outcome of the other, right? They're just two separate cases. Or if they're fully married, if she's your full sister, then fine. But one does not learn out of the other one. It's not because of if she's usher to you. If your mother's daughter is usher to you, it's not because she's your father's daughter, right? And your father's daughter is usher. It's not because she's your mother's daughter. One doesn't emanate from the other. But over here, your granddaughter is usher to you because she's your daughter's daughter. Or your son's daughter, right? So therefore, that's more of a Gilui Milsa. That's not a Kal V'chomer. It's more of a Gilui Milsa. That's a Bai's answer. Rava says no. Rava says that what? Amarli Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. It's very simple. You know how we know it's also heina. What do we say? There's a Gzeira Shava between a man's granddaughters out of wedlock, right, to a man's granddaughters in wedlock. The pasuk in Perek Yud Ches pasuk Yud and pasuk Yud Zayin, right? Heina, it says by both of them. So we learn one from the other, and then the punishment is learned from Zimahi to the punishment of Sreifa in Perek Chaf. So Rava says very good. How do you know that you can't? Where's the issur to sleep with your own daughter if she's your daughter out of wedlock, right? Based not like the Kal V'chomer like Abaye says, but based on this Gzeira Shava of Heina. Tosfos points out even Abaye holds the Gzeira Shava. It's a little bit difficult because Abaye holds the Gzeira Shava elsewhere, and he is not Mamait in the Gzeira Shava. So he apparently holds the Gzeira Shava too. But he says it's also a Gilui Milsa B'Alma. Maybe he's just adding on. But he also agrees with Rava that it's a Gzeira Shava here. Also Heina to tell me the Isser, and Zima to tell me that the punishment is Sreifa. Tani Avua de Ravavim. He learns a different drasha entirely. Lefishal Aman Labita Menesaso. Because the pasuk didn't say beferish that your daughter out of wedlock, anusasa means he raped her, whatever, it means out of wedlock. Listen to this. Ubas ish kohen kisechel. So what does pasuk say, Michael? Ubas ish kohen kisechel savia himachalelos ba'eshti sarev. Right? If a bas kohen commits adultery when she's married, she gets sreifa. What does her paramour get? What does her adulterer get? He gets, whatever the punishment would be normally for sleeping with a married woman. If she's only betrothed, it would be skila. If she's fully married, it would be chenek. Okay. But it says, why did it say bas ish kohen? Why did it say just bas kohen? We know what bas kohen. You're a bas kohen. You're a bas Yisrael. You're bas Levi, right? Whatever, right? Why did it say bas ish kohen? So he says bas ish kohen, bas ish kohen. So first he says So here, it's not so clear in the Gemara. Rashi explained it. Take a look at the second of the wide lines in Rashi. Ubas ish kohen. To have to remember, Bas Kohen could have just said Bas Kohen. Because of it says ish lo melacha bas ish man usaso. We're talking about his daughter out of wedlock. She'ena bas ishto, not the daughter of his wife, but kisechel is nos es avia. We say the way we read is if she committed adultery, meaning she profaned her esavia. We say kisecha liznus if she commits adultery, comma esavia hi mechalelas, right? That's how we normally read it, Michael, right? Esavia mechalelas. He does kisecha liznus esavia komish zin samei avia b'sreifa. That's how he's saying this pasuk of basish kohen kisechas is not just telling me that if a married or betrothed bas kohen commits adultery that she's going to be burned. He's also telling you that if she has adultery with her father, that's how he's dashing the pasuk. He doesn't like Abaya's answer of Kal V'chomer or Rava's of Gzeira Shava, which everybody should hold of. He says another pshat. Ubas Ish Kohen, right? Bas Ish Kohen tells me that if she had committed adultery with her father, she gets sreifa. That's so he's got like a pasuk for that. Imabas Kohen Yibasreifa Vein Bob said, wait a minute. We said if a Bas Kohen who's married commits adultery with an adulterer, and she gets reifa, but the husband, the adulterer gets either chenek or skila, depending if she's married or betrothed. Maybe you want to say the same thing too. If he commits adultery with his own daughter, who is his daughter out of wedlock, she gets reifa. Maybe he shouldn't get reifa. Now we've said everybody says he gets reifa because the Gzeira Shava, Haina, etc. says Zima. But if he's learning it out from here, it says if he's learning it out based on Vasish Kohen, it says she's gets sreifa. What is he supposed to get? Maybe he also should not get sreifa. Ein bola b'sreifa. Just like if an outside adulterer would get chenek or skila, maybe he also should get that. Also he was sreifa and bola sreifa. Amar Abai, Amar Kol Paskas esavia hi mechalelas, right? Misha mechalelas esavia aslu via mechalala. When does she get sreifa as opposed to her adulterer? Right? When she is profaning it, she committed adultery. But over here, here the father is being machal her, right? She wasn't a halal because she came out of born out of wedlock. That's not so bad. But not only was she born out of wedlock, but now he sleeps with her. He is profaning her, and therefore we don't say that she gets reifa and he doesn't, but he also gets reifa. Rav says, what else would you give him? Rav Bishlam Hasam afik the medina de bas kohen, take him out of askem bukim na dina de bas Yisrael. Meaning, when a regular adulterer has relations with this bas kohen who's betrothed or married, okay, so says she gets reifa and he gets whatever he would get from normally sleeping with a married woman, right? Either chenek or skila if she was married or betrothed. Hacha adina de ma'ik masla. What are you going to tell her here? Adina de pnuya. What are you going to say? She's if he sleeps with his own daughter, right? We're talking about if he sleeps with his own daughter. What are you going to say? Well, she's a pnuya. What are you going to give him and say? It's like a man who sleeps with a pnuya. There's no punishment at all there. It's a priestess, but there's no punishment at all. It doesn't make any sense. So therefore, you have to give it the same thing. You have to give it sreifa, not based on savia mechalel as yatzu shavia mechalel, but simply what else would you give him? If a man sleeps with his own bas kohen daughter, right? Makes no difference if you sleep with your daughter. Makes no difference if she's married or not. The issue is based on the fact that she's your daughter, right? So what else would you give him? She's not like so. There you could say, if she was married, a regular adulterer who slept with the bas kohen, so you give her whatever is like she's as if she's married. If she's fully married, you give him chenek even though she gets reifa. If she's only betrothed, you give him skila even though she gets sreifa. But over here, where a father slept with his own bas kohen daughter, he's a kohen. Besides the fact that he mechal her and everything, and he's a kohen. What are you going to give him? So therefore, you have to give him sreifa. Right? Adina he says, Hacha, Adina the man mukvisla, Adina the pneuya mukvisla, you're going to give him like a pneuya, like she shouldn't be punished at all. That's ridiculous. What about Ashar Labasa Bitamasasa? Where is the Losa say? So this is all learned out of Psukim Heina. So you get there if you hold the Gzeira Shava, fine. If you hold of the Kal V'chomer like Abaya, fine. But if you don't know that, so where's the Ashara? Where's the prohibition? Where's the pasuk say that you can't sleep with your own daughter who is your daughter out of wedlock? Again, Abaya says you learn it out of the Gzeira Shava, out of the Kal V'chomer rather. So the way Kal V'chomer, you learn it out just like the granddaughter's the punishment is reifa. Same thing for the daughter. And according to Rav also, the Gzeira Shava of Heina Zima Zima. Elatani devavu Rav Avin, but Rav Avin who had this drasha of learning out from Basish Kohen, she's going to get sreifa, right? She's going to get sreifa, and he's going to get sreifa too if he sleeps with his own daughter. Where's the prohibition? Amar v'la, Amar the pasuk is al tchalas bit chalas nosa. It's another pasuk. It says, do not profane your daughter to cause her to commit don't profane her into prostitution. That's the Yisur. Al Tchalas Bitchalas Nosa. Don't train her into prostitution. That's your Losa say. Maskov Yaakov Achba Achua do Ravacha Bar Yaakov. Hi, Al Tchalas Bitchalas Nosa Lahachiro. So you think that's Al Tchalas Bitchalas Nosa is coming to teach me this idea that you shouldn't sleep with your own daughter, right? Hami boy lo kretanya use it for different drashot. Tchalas Bitchalas Nosa Yochel Bekoin Amasias Bitul Levi Yisrael. You might think that don't profane your daughter, right? To cause her to go into prostitution. Maybe that means she shouldn't marry a Levi Yisrael. Kohanim there was a time when Kohanim only married Bas Kohanim, sort of like the Chabadniks. They only marry within Chabad, right? They only marry their own kind. Maybe that's what it means. Don't profane the priesthood to get your daughter married to a Yisrael or a Levi. Doesn't mean that. Talmud Lo Malas Nosa, Bechil Shabbos Nusikas, and we're talking about profaning her into prostitution, but Moses Spito, Shalol L'Shem Mishas, telling, giving her out as a prostitute, giving her over into a relationship with somebody without getting married. That's what the drush is for, not to teach me you shouldn't sleep with your own daughter. Zimkein Lemekra Al Tachel could have just said Al Tochel. That's also profaning, like Lo Yachel Dvaro, don't profane your words. My Al Tachalel, the double Lashon of the Damalamit, Shmamina Tarchi, see both things from there. But Bai Rava. So Bai Rava, who know the punishment and the Azara from either the Kavachomer, which we said is Gila Milsa, or the Zereshava, Hi Al Tchalas B'Chalas Nosa. What do they do with the double Lamed there? Amar Mani, Zeh Mesias Bitul Zakein, a man who marries off his young daughter to an old man. Right? Because what are you doing there? You're effectively causing her to go into prostitution because the old man is not going to want to sleep with her a lot, right? An old man, what is he doing with a young girl over here? So if you marry off your young daughter to an old man, that's causing her to go into prostitution. That's what does that mean? Profaning your daughter, causing her to go into prostitution. If you marry a young little girl to an old man, she's going to want to have a family, and he's an old man already. That's Amasha, rather, I say. That's a man who delays his daughter while she's marriageable age, she's over 12 and a half, and he delays her at home. And I think we'll see, he's cheap, but he doesn't want her to get married, he needs her to work around the house, it's a farm, etc., etc. That's also causing her to go into adultery because she's going to want to get married. She wants to have children, and he's keeping her at home to be a spinster. There is no poor man among Israel. We'll see what this means. It doesn't mean only that's only poor. Ela Rasha Arum, a subtle evil person who, like a cunning person. That's one. V'hamasha bita bogeres. And a person who delays his daughter from getting married, leaves her so to speak, leaves her into adulthood, without marrying her off. That's also a Russia. Why do you say what a Russia? Who is a poor person in Israel? A Russia Aram, and a person who delays his daughter from getting married. A person who delays his daughter from is also a Russia. Is also Russia. Rabbi means this. Ezo ani Russia Aram. Who is a poor Russia? There are many poor people, and there are many Russia Aram. But who is a poor person who's a Russia Aram? Both those things, both those characters. That's the person who delays his daughter from getting married, even though she's already turned into a marriageable. She's, so to speak, in Shidduchan already, and he delays her from getting married. Why? Because he's poor, and he's got a farm, and he doesn't want to hire workers or a shifcha to work, so he keeps his daughter from getting married so she can help in the house. Another thing that Rav Kana said in the name of Rav Akiva, we had this Rav Akiva Omer Mashin, and this is Rav Kana Shem Rav Akiva, and this is a great line. Be careful of the person who's giving you advice for his own benefit. Get those calls every day, right? Can you go in? Would you like to go into this proposition that he's giving you advice? I need advice from this guy who's doing it for his own benefit, right? And keep that line as good. Now you can quote the Gemara when they call you up for a proposition. You tell them, be careful. The pasuk says, beware of the person who gives you advice for his own benefit. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav in the fourth line on the page. Tosfos points out also that there are many Rasha Arams, but we're talking about here is an ani Rasha Aram. This is a singular thing, all right? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav. If you marry off your young daughter to an old man, and similarly, or if you marry an adult woman to your young child, right? And or if you return a lost item to a goy, Pasuk says, Laman, Svos Harava, Hatzmeya. So you're trying to join drunkenness with thirst. What do we mean by that? So you're trying to put them together and says, Lo Yova Hashem Sloch, at the beginning of Nitzavim over there, right? Shalom Yali ki b'shlus liba elech, right? You're trying to join two things that are opposing. What do we mean that? Rava is drunkenness, a person who's satiated, meaning an old man is already satiated. The smeya, the thirst, is the young girl who wants to have a family, and the reverse would be the young boy who is thirsty with the older woman. Now, Tosafos says, what do you mean? How can you marry off a young boy anyway? Kedushin's not chal on a young boy. It's like znus. So he says, even though it's not kedushin, and you wouldn't be chayiv yibum and chalitza, etc. It's not a man can marry off his young daughter even if she's 1 day old, right? He has rishus over his daughter until she's 12, and if he can marry her off against her will. But a male cannot get married until he's bar mitzvah. But the point is that it's not znus either, because he's marrying off and they'll grow up together. That's his idea. But if he's a young boy and she is an old woman, that's also causing them to do bad. And if you return what's the idea of returning? Is there something wrong with returning a beta to a goy? So Rashi says that the reason is that you're saying Jews and goyim are alike, and they're not the same. And you're saying that Hashavas Beit is not because of a mitzvah; it's because you're a good Western man who treats all people equally, and that's what's wrong over here. And the pasuk says, Hashem will not be happy with you when you're joining two different things together. What do you mean? Can't marry off your young if you love your wife like yourself, right? And you honor her more. And Rashi says, with nice jewelry. If it doesn't glitter, it doesn't count, right? So if you love your wife like yourself and you honor her more, so you have to honor her more than yourself, right? And you lead your children in the right way. And you marry them off before puberty. All of the pasuk says, you will know that your tent is in peace, meaning your house. You will visit your habitation without sinning. So what do you see over here? You're supposed to marry them off, as they get towards puberty. The answer is you shouldn't marry them off too young. If you take a 4-year-old and give him to a 98-year-old woman, that doesn't work too well, right? But if you're talking about close to puberty, that's okay. We're not yet done with the mothers-in-law. If you love your neighbors, hard thing to do. Even harder to be makar of your relatives. So you marry others, consider a great mitzvah to marry your sister's daughter, right? Because you have similar traits. These are all good traits to love one another, to makar of people, to marry your niece, and can't marry your aunt. That's also marry your niece. You could and you lend money to a poor person when things are tough for him, when he's very needy. All of Pasuk says, when you call out Hashem Yana, you're doing good to God's people. Hashem will also answer you when you call to him. Back we had this Gemara really should have been at the beginning of the Mishnah, right from the Mishnah about the mothers-in-law, right? What does the pasuk say? This is the pasuk in Parakaf that we quoted yesterday. If you marry a woman and her mother, him, the adulterer, the eshen, and them. Now, how do you darshan eshen? Says, and one of them. What are we speaking about? He says the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law's mother is learned out of a drasha, but the pasuk it says eshen. Eshen means one of them. We'll see why. Why? I mean one of them meaning the mother-in-law. Mother-in-law. Not it says isha ishkev es isha ves ima beishis roso eshen. One of them meaning the mother-in-law, not the wife. Obviously, the wife you're entitled to. She's your wife, right? Rabbi Yekriva oso ves shtein. Eshen means them. Meaning, so what's the difference with Rabbi? How do you learn the pasuk? Rabbi Shmuel Savar Oso Vesen Oso Ves Achas Mehen means one of them. She came B'lashon Yibani in Greek. Koran Achas Mehen Hina. Hina is like one, like Wachad. One. Hina is one. So it's one of them. Okay. So what's one of them? The mother-in-law. The mother-in-law is also the Ein Chamos Midrash Asi. Ein Chamos is learned out of the drush that we discussed yesterday. The drushes of is learned that the mother-in-law's mother is out of a drush that it's also, but it's not the favor from the pasuk. What's favor from the pasuk is they send the mother-in-law. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Rabbi Kiva Savar Oso Vesen Oso Veshkein. Both of them. They're both in the pasuk. Then when the pasuk says Oso Vesen means that if you take your wife and you marry her mother or her mother-in-law. both of those are usher. You married, or you married both of them. You have your wife, and you slept with her mother and her mother's mother. Also v'shteim, right? Meaning both of them. So v'kiva savar also v'shteim. Ve'im chamoso ve'im chamoso chaksiva. The mother-in-law's mother is written here. What's learned out of a drasha? Your father-in-law's mother. Your father-in-law's mother. That's learned out of a drasha. But your mother-in-law's mother is beferish in the pasuk, according to Rabbi Kiva. Rav Amar no. The Rabbi says no. Chamos l'achamisik minayim. They both agree that the pasuk is only speaking about chamoso. The only one of the pasuk is your mother-in-law. Your mother-in-law's mother is learned out of a drasha, just like your father-in-law's mother. Just like your father-in-law's mother. What's the machlokas over here? Here's the question: if your wife dies, are you still also to marry your mother-in-law? So Rabbi Shmuel says eshen means eshen when one of them, meaning your wife and your mother-in-law, even if your mother-in-law is the only one alive, your wife is gone, you still get sreifa for sleeping with your mother-in-law. So in other words, eshen means one of them. If one of them is alive, meaning if your mother-in-law is still alive, even if your wife is gone, you're going to get sreifa for sleeping with her. Kiva savar isur bialma. No, it doesn't mean that. Oso means v'shtein. It's only also to marry your mother-in-law if your wife is still around. That's when you get sreifa. But if your wife is dead already, the punishment for your mother-in-law is just usher. It's usher because it says arur shochevim chosanto. Cursed be you who sleeps with your mother-in-law, right? But it's not a pasha, it's sreifa. In other words, he said oso v'esen. If they're both alive, then there's an isra sreifa. Then you're going to get sreifa according to Bekiva. But if they're not both alive, you're not going to get sreifa. Elu neherogan. The following people are decapitated. Right, we've learned skila, the people get skila. We learn now the people get sreifa, the 10 cases that we discussed in the last Mishnah, and the following people get decapitation. A murderer, person on nidachas, not the madiach, not the person who caused them, subverted them, but the people of the nidachas, the subverted city. They were subverted to avodah zarah by this madiach, by the madiach. Rotseach shehikes reyeu be'eveno ba'arzel. What does it mean by rotseach? He hit somebody with a stone or with metal, with iron. Or he kept them underwater. He sunk them underwater. He kept them from coming out of the water. Or kept them in a 5. In others, we'll see. Even if he didn't push him in, but if he kept them down, that's also. So what did they do in the when there was a moser among the Jews? Many times when they went to the mikveh, they would keep him down there, right? So chayiv, then he's chayiv. And as your chayiv misa for murderer, for being a murderer, if you kept him in the water or the fire, kept him from getting out. Let's say you pushed him into the water, or he could have gotten out of there, and he didn't. Mace, and you're potter of loss, of course. Don't do that. Let's say you set a dog, you provoked a dog to attack this person, or you provoked a nachash, a snake, to attack this person, to bite him. Potter. Again, Potter of Allah, so you did a bad thing, but you didn't kill him. But actually, if you actually took the snake by his head and stuck him next to the person's skin, that's like it's like you're putting a knife into him. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Machai say you're still Potter because it still is the will of the snake. The snake didn't have to bite him. It's not like putting a knife into the guy." Amar Shmuel, when it talks about, it says oiko, it says about you when you kill somebody. It says or be'even yad, a stone. A hand stone, or it says Evan eitz, right? It says Evan bekli eitz yad, a wooden kli that's in your hand. But the barzel, it doesn't say malo nemer yad bebarzel, but by iron or metal, it doesn't say yad there. Shabarzel nemes b'choshu. With an iron or with metal, you can kill with a little bit, like with a knife, as we'll see in it if you pierce them. Tanya Rabbi Hashem knew. It was revealed. It was Hashem knew that iron or knife or metal can kill even with a little amount. The Torah didn't give a shear. In other words, if you hit the guy with a pebble and he died, a little pebble, and the guy died, he didn't die because of the pebble. He probably had a heart attack or he was sick anyway, right? But if you hit him with a stone or with a piece of wood or something, it's got to be big enough to kill. Otherwise, you didn't kill him. But with a knife, all you do is you can kill him with a pin if you stick it in the right place in his heart or something like that. Therefore, turbo shear didn't give a certain amount that it had to be a certain measure. That's only if he pierced him. If he cut him or something, then you need big enough to actually do the damage. and he held him down in the water. The Reisha tells us what? That if you held him down in the water, it tells us a chiddush, an anomaly. Even though you didn't push him in the water. He fell into the water. He fell into the water by accident, and you kept him down. You killed him. Sefer Abusa, the Sefer is the chiddush of what? Even though you pushed him into the water or into the fire, even the yochal alas misham, but since he could get out and he didn't, umeis, you're potter. How do we know that if you kept him down in the water, you're chayav? Amar Shmuel Pasuk says, "O be'eva," or with enmity. L'Rabba says, and it was enmity. You didn't actually kill him, but you didn't actually push him in, or you didn't use a knife against him or a stone, but you kept him under the water. If you keep him under the water, you're also chayav. Mitzamtzem also means you kept him under the water. All right, we're up to the 5 months from the bottom of the page. Ahu gavra the mitzamtzem l'chiyusa. Let's say he did that. He caused an animal to die that way by keeping him in the sun or whatever like that. What's the chiyuv there? We'll talk about that. We'll pick it up tomorrow from there. Have a good day, everybody. Kol tuv.
Beautiful. Thank you.